Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are, for our ROI of Quality webinar. My name is David Isaacson, and I will be hosting today's session. And I will be joined by Adam Riley, and we'll talk a bit more about Adam in a moment. But what I want to do first is give everybody just a quick bit of logistics for this webinar. First of all, the webinar is being recorded. You will all get a copy or a link to the recording after the session. When you registered, you were asked to submit questions, and we got a lot of questions, and we do appreciate that, and thank you for submitting questions ahead of time. But those aren't the only questions we're going to be taking today, so if you have additional questions, please use the question box in GoToWebinar and submit those, and we will try to answer as many as we can. So as I said, I'm David Isaacson. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing with ETQ, and I'll be joined today by Adam Riley, who's the Senior Manager of Global Quality Management Systems at Trane Technologies. Adam has been a huge proponent of ROI over the years, and in a few minutes, Adam will tell us his story about how he tracks ROI and how he got into it and his journey through getting to the point where he's at today in terms of being able to cost justify quality projects at Trane. But before we get into that, I just want to take a few minutes to discuss what we're really talking about here. And we're talking about ROI, return on investment. And I'm just starting with the basic and the classic definition that ROI is revenues or the benefit minus the cost of investment divided by the cost of investment. It's a pretty simple formula, but a lot goes into this. There's a lot behind, especially the cost of investment number. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And Adam will talk about how he uses this formula, this measure, when he talks to his management about projects he's looking to do. We'll talk a little bit about two levels of ROI today. One is organization-wide, where you have quality spend, and this is a lot of times where we talk about the cost of quality, the cost of poor quality, the overall investment, the overall return on that investment, the overall benefit or revenues that can come from that, or cost savings. So it's not just revenues, but it's a top line and a bottom line approach to tracking what happens with that ROI when we talk about quality. On the flip side, we can also get into a more granular discussion of ROI. And many times in your organizations, when you want to do a project or somebody in your organization wants to do a project that's going to involve investment, spending money, your management's going to ask, well, what's the ROI of this project? So if I'm going to invest $100,000, how much is it going to save me? How much revenue is it going to generate? So we're going to look at this a bit from both sides. We'll start more at the organization-wide level, because what we've seen in research that we've done at ETQ is that return on investment for quality management is real, both organization-wide and project. It can be measured. However, measuring it is not always easy. So we undertook a project to go out and survey 300 business, IT, and quality executives and find out what they were doing or how they were doing when it came to their perception and their investments in quality. And I'm going to relate this back to the formula because I want to just start to look at how you can calculate an ROI based upon some straightforward numbers here. So we have a company here that's about 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion in size on average. And in fact, this was the average of all 300 of these businesses that we looked at. And let me just say that ROI is not just for big companies. It's for any size company. If you're a small company just starting out, or you've been going for a while and your revenues are in the hundreds of millions and not in the billions, not a problem. It still makes a lot of sense to calculate what that ROI is of that next project or that next investment, or how you're doing as an organization globally, because it's always good to understand where you are. And so this approach will be applicable regardless of the size of the organization you deal with. We looked at the average spending on quality programs and people, specifically the programs and people, and that was about 5.6 of the revenue that those companies were generating. We also asked them what their increase was going to be, and I think what's really telling, and we do have a full report on this survey and this study that we did, most organizations are looking to increase their spend in quality very significantly. In fact, 21% increase on quality spending on programs and people specifically. So I think what you're seeing is a recognition, and it's growing, and this is something we'll talk with Adam about as well. Quality is important, and more and more people in the organization are getting it. In fact, it was interesting in this survey, I don't have the slide on it, but the executives thought quality was doing better and was having a bigger impact than even some of the quality managers that we surveyed. So there's this perception, growing perception, especially in the executive wing, that quality really is critical to the business. And we also see that investment extends to adding headcount. Organizations are looking to add on average 23% more people. And then we flip to the other side, because that's the positive side of the investment. You're spending more on quality, you're bringing more people in, you're doing more with quality. But the flip side is that there is still a cost of poor quality. Things like warranty, scrap, repairs, returns, those are real hard costs that you can identify. What about the time people spend in meetings trying to figure out what went wrong? Time executives spend on the phone with customers and the poor reputation that occurs. That's a cost of poor quality. Not always easy to measure, not always easy to quantify, but all of those things together and more make up the cost of poor quality. And what we see is that overall, the spending on quality as a percentage of total company revenues was about 6%. We also looked at what those organizations were getting in terms of additional revenues from good quality, and it turned out to be about 11% of their existing revenues. So then if we want to look at this, there's some key numbers here to help us calculate the ROI for this group of 300. So we look at the average spending on quality programs and people. We look at the average cost from poor quality, and together that's about 127 million in this case, about 9% of revenue. And then we have the additional revenues at 11%. And if we plug that into the formula, we do 156 million minus 27, 127 divided by 127, and that gives us a return on investment here of 23%. So in this case, the investment was worth it because we're making a positive return on this investment. And this is globally. This is not individual project based, but really globally for what we're looking at here. So as I said, it's not easy to measure the full cost of quality. We've talked, and I've mentioned a few different measures that are real that you can certainly put a dollar amount on, and some that aren't quite as real, like how much more time people are spending running around trying to solve problems. And it's not just within the quality department, it spreads throughout the whole organization. What is your engineering team doing? What's your sales team doing as they try to resolve a customer issue? You know, what are the executive team doing? So there's time spent across the organization that's a result of poor quality that typically doesn't get measured as part of the ROI. So getting that total cost of quality or even the cost of poor quality is difficult. So what Gartner recommends is even if you don't have all the data, at least an incomplete total cost of quality will help show that you can have a real impact, even if you can't sum up all the numbers to get to a final number. At least it gives you a directional measure that you can use and show to management, say, here's where we can have a significant impact. So I would recommend if you aren't measuring the cost of quality, that's a good place to start. I'm sure most of you already are or have some idea of what your cost of quality is. It's just making sure that they're numbers that you feel comfortable supporting. And one of the other interesting aspects that we found is that ROI, even though it typically is a financial measure, is not the only measure that our customers, ETQ's customers, have told us that they leverage when justifying investment in quality. So let me give you a few examples. And the first one's really interesting. We have a consumer packaged goods company. They see ROIs in tens of thousands of percent. Now, this is a cautionary number right here, because typically when you go out and you want to look at ROI, you're not going to want to be in this range, because most management teams, your CFO, your chief operating officer, your CEO, they're not going to believe typically a number like this, at least not out of the gate. We recommend that you want to focus at ROI and keep it, manageable and understandable and believable. But as you get more and more credibility, and this is something we'll talk about with Adam as well, because this is a trajectory he's been on in his journey, is that as he showed credibility and proof on the return on his quality investments, and they did start to go up, they were more believable, and they were numbers that he could justify, he could support, and management believed it. So when you start looking at, out of the gate, you have a really large ROI, I would say go back and check your assumptions and even dial it back a little bit to get something that's more realistic, or at least more believable to start. Another company of a customer of ours, an educational company, was seeing $500,000 per year. So this is a hard savings that they were seeing in terms of what they were measuring. We have an auto manufacturer who not only looked at the savings per year in the ROI, but they also looked at the payback. So their investment, they were getting it back in just about 2.5 months. Really impactful, because when you're making investments these days, especially in SaaS and annual software, you want to see that payback. You want that payback to be less than 12 months. And in this case, 2.5 months was very reasonable for them. A material science company, they didn't just look at financial, they looked at the reduction in risk and making sure that the organization was safer for their associates, for their employees. That was critical to them. So that was a return that they couldn't measure, but was as important as any financial measure that they were looking at. There was a printing company who's a customer of ours that was not only seeing financial savings, but they were also seeing significant facilities efficiencies. Again, maybe not something you could put a real dollar amount on, but was a real benefit to the organization. And then finally, and I like this one a lot, an aircraft manufacturer, they weren't so much measuring the return on investment in dollars, they were measuring it on lives not lost. And I think that's really impactful. So those were more organizational focused ROIs. And then we're going to go drill into a bit more on a project level, because that's really, I think, when you're going to go look at an investment in QMS or a quality project, it's going to be a project. It's not going to be something that you want to measure globally, even though at some point somebody's going to sit up and say, hey, all our quality investments over the last couple of years, how are we doing across those? And you should be able to generate those as well from this more global organization-wide view. So there are lots of different quality projects. And just to name a few, installing a QMS, you want to install a QMS for the first time or replace one, what's that going to do? What's the ROI look like on that type of an investment? Maybe you just want to add users. Maybe you want to go more global and open the door to the system and let a lot of people get in, because quality isn't just the purview of the quality department. It should be everybody's job. So the more access that you give to the system, the more you might be able to drive savings and revenue and other benefits by giving more users access. Maybe you want to expand features and functions. A lot of customers like to start with some basic capabilities or look at those projects that might have the highest return. And we'll talk to Adam about that in just a minute, in terms of how he has progressed along his journey, because he didn't take a traditional path of starting with document control and then moving to the next to corrective action and then employee training and so forth. He took a different path through where he wanted to get to with quality. And then any other specific projects that might leverage QMS and the quality organization. So we can look at these on a lot of different, and I'm sure you could come up with a whole list of different types of quality projects that you might want to say, I want to measure what the ROI will be on this project. And in fact, your management team or the funding authority within your organization might say, I need to understand what the return is before we move forward with this project. So we recently did an ROI study with a number of our customers, Adam being one of them that was a participant, and we identified the value drivers that our customers really saw as important in measuring return. We collected real world examples. In fact, when I say we actually had a third party do this and interview a lot of customers, and this third party has a lot of experience building ROI models. So they came up with real world examples from the users of QMS. And what's really important about this is we're not making up numbers. These are actual reported savings and earnings and benefits that these organizations saw. And based upon all of those pieces of material, those data points, they built an ROI model. And then to justify that, they went through and applied it to specific customer projects, and the benefits were really there. And it really makes a huge impact when you can say, here's my inputs, here's my outputs, here's what my ROI is going to be. And in fact, let's talk about that for a moment, where we really see a lot of value. There were 4 key areas that seeing value within an investment for quality. One is the reduced risk of noncompliance. Second is streamline operations. Third is just reducing hard costs of things like scrap and field failures and warranty. And the fourth was to actually increase revenue. So we took a top line and a bottom line view of what drives ROI. And you can see there are a number of different items in each of those categories. Some of them are more productivity improvements where we're saving time and freeing people up from doing what might be considered grunt work and more focused on higher value type activities. We did see where we had cost savings. So I mentioned, scrap and inventory carrying costs. The fact that a number of organizations were able to reduce the number of different quality systems that they had, so they didn't have to invest as much in IT or in those systems and pay maintenance on those systems. And we also saw a lot of revenue increase. So whether you're looking at an improvement in your view of how you're viewed in the market, so your customer satisfaction goes up, how you're looking in terms of how quick you can bring products to market. So if you can take a product and reduce the amount of time it takes to get to market from, say, 12 months to 9 months, those 3 months are additional revenue you would never have gotten otherwise. So there's a lot of different ways to look at the benefits that you get from quality projects. And there were a lot of numbers that came out of this. And so for each of those areas that I just showed, we were able to show real improvement. Reduction in time, reduction in cost, improvement in revenues across the board. I think it's really critical that once you see all these, you can understand that you can build a very strong case for an ROI. And I think that that's really exciting because, and one of the topics that we'll talk about with Adam is what has the impact been on his organization and on him, and the projects he wants to drive forward within his organization, within Train. And just give you one example. This is an amalgam of a couple of different customers. So we've put in here that we had a customer that had a $760 million in revenue. They incurred $24 million a year in scrap and rework, had 19 auditors, 150 employees spending time on document control, and 26 supplier corrective actions per month. Through the investment that they made, they had a payback under 5 months. They saw an annual benefit of $665,000, and their 3-year return on investment was 330%. That is a great investment, therefore, for their organization, because whatever they spent on it they made money. At the end of 3 years, they were ahead of the game. This is a real life example that that has actually borne fruit for that organization. And finally, one of the other benefits of getting into this discussion of ROI is it takes us out of just talking the language of quality. And you see in the yellow sticky notes terms we're all very familiar with, and we use it every day in our lives, in our businesses. And it takes us into those pink sticky notes where we're talking the language of business. Our CEOs don't talk APQP and quality audits and Six Sigma. Our CEOs talk profit, expenses, they talk revenue, they talk ROI, they talk EBITDA, they talk finance, they talk the business of language. And so that's where this type of an approach really bridges the gap between quality and business. So now I'm going to reintroduce Adam. Adam Riley works at Train. He is head of their quality management organization. And I'm going to ask Adam to introduce himself and tell you a little bit about his journey. Adam?
All right, thank you, David. My name is Adam Riley. I'm the Quality Systems Leader for Train Technologies, formerly Ingersoll Rand. Those of you who may have heard in the news recently, just a few months back, the company did split. Ingersoll Rand now is made up of 2 individual entities. I've moved on with the Train technology side. So I'm going to talk in the next discussion is going to be, as this journey has gone on for the last 4 years, even really from 2013, I'm going to speak in terms of both companies. Okay, so as I talk about through the timeline, it's going to be more along the lines of, when we started out, we were Ingersoll Rand, and then as we are today, where we're Trained. We have not changed our direction. Actually, with the split of the company, my direction from our C-suite has been to speed up and go faster. So as you'll see as we talk through the journey, how that kind of came to be, because it hasn't always been that way. So where we really start was back in 2013. So at the time, Ingersoll Rand had a number of business units, one of which being Club Car. Anybody who's ever golfed or has probably heard of a Club Car golf cart. Club Car took it on themselves to really make a leap forward and digitize their quality management system. Now, at the time, the company was very fragmented in how we did quality. Every business had their own path, if you will. So Club Car, being the pioneers that they were, they took it on and said, we're going to take ETQ, we're going to build an electronic quality information system. Now, they focused solely in the beginning on things like customer complaints. That was a big one for them. Supplier corrective action was kind of next up on their list, but they were really looking at it from a method to get that information from the customer back into the plant in real time. So that being said, from 2013 to 2016, they really worked on their own with no real involvement from enterprise. It was a business supported, business financed venture. And then in 2016, they reported back to the company the improvements. So over the course of those 3 years, they had realized over a 50% reduction in warranty claims, which was the big win. There were a number of other things such as cycle time reduction, speed to customer when it came to addressing complaints. So in 2016, it was decided by the Quality Leadership Council that we would take ETQ and we would expand it worldwide. We would take it to every corner of the world for our company, and then we would expand upon it. So at that time is when I came in. I was tasked with basically taking what they started, moving it into more of a universal process, and then expanding it across the globe. Originally, we had a goal to have that done by 2020. And then as you'll see here, we actually came in a little bit ahead of schedule. But as we go through, really, we spent most of 2016 and the first half, at least, of 2017 commonizing our processes. And this is the key of what we're going to talk to today. Because one of the things, and I think David said it best, one of the benefits you'll realize is you may not understand or even know how many different software packages or processes are happening within your business. When we did the original study in 2016 to understand what the impact was going to be, even from a financial piece, we found that 65 separate software packages were being used to do hundreds of different quality processes around our company. We were paying for every one of those. Now, IT was paying for it out of a separate bucket, so it never was visible to anybody. But it was one of those instantaneous things where you said, wait a minute, this is a good cost savings. As we start to pull away from all those 65 different packages into one solution, we start to then track how much of that spend is going away. And it's not a cost avoidance in some cases, because a lot of these were true cost savings. We just turned them off once we were able to replicate them within ETQ. Now, that being said, our first module and our first site, pilot sites, launched towards the end of 2017, September, October timeframe. We did not start with document control, as David said. We were one of the companies at the time. We took a hard look and said, where is going to be the biggest financial impact? Now, if any of you were at the conferences over the last few years, 2 years ago, I sat on a supplier quality board panel, and we talked about really justification. You know, what are some of the big things you can do in supplier quality? And at the time, I made a comment. I didn't think much of it, but I made the comment of, you need to learn to speak the language of business. David said it best. Most of you, where the money's coming from, where your leadership is going to be approving or rejecting these proposals, they don't speak in quality terms. Some of them may understand basic terms. Some of them may even understand past impact that quality's had on their product. But for the most part, they do not speak the language of quality. They do speak, however, financial language. So the slide that David had up that talked about the yellow cards and the pink cards, it's a very good representation of how you need to adapt your speaking in order to push these types of projects from the theoretical, we'd like to have them, it'd be nice to have, to the where we are today, flash forward, where leadership's coming to my team saying, can you do more? If we give you more money, what more can you do for us? And it's because we've made a concerted effort over the years that we speak in the pink at the bottom. We speak in profit, we speak in revenue, we speak in ROI. We've done that specifically because years ago it was a mentor of mine that really, when I was in operations, that said, you know, if you want projects to come through, you have to learn to speak in a way that they will listen. This is where this all kind of was born from. Now we flash forward 2 years, or I should say this year in March, we had another discussion on ROI, and we talked again about the language of business. If you look at our progression through the years, we were in the beginning, it was tough getting the approval because it was untested, unproven. Where we started, however, is I looked at the biggest financial impacts to our company. We said, okay, where are we bleeding money today? And those are the things that we went after first in our, if you want to call them our core modules. We did not look at document control because for us, there was almost no way for me to justify to my leadership that document control was in any way, shape, or form going to save us money. Now, we are not in a regulatory industry, okay? You know, we have conditioned air, we have golf carts, which is close to automotive, but we were not in a regulatory where documentation is that important. So we started with very simple ones. We started with a supplier quality audit because we knew we were hemorrhaging money at our suppliers. We also started with non-conforming material. We started with SCAR. Okay, we started with process and product deviations. So we picked two things that were external to the business, if you think about the inputs to the business, and then we took the two things, deviation and NCM, that were very internally. We were all over the place. And now what brought us to one of those was simply when I went to finance and said, I want to look at the 10K reports. I want to look at the financial metrics from an enterprise perspective that we have. When it comes to poor quality, one of the feedback I got was, well, you know, we really don't have a good understanding of what that means. Everybody, because we had 54 sites around the world, everybody bucketized it differently. Everyone tracked it differently because they were allowed to. That was actually one of the things that we pushed in the early days was this system will help us see where the true problems are. We think we know, and we can justify the work that we're doing with these big financial impacts, things such as non-conforming materials, supplier, in this case, RMA, or supplier defects. We can go after those. That led us to, as we go flash forward to today, that led us to those projects where now we're saying we have a good baseline, we understand where the problems are. Now we're able to go after those continuous improvement pieces to streamline what we've already done, but at the same time, we start to branch out into other opportunities. So if you look at things I'm working on today, we've crossed the threshold of quality, and now we are building modules and building interfaces with engineering, building things for global procurement, building things for EHS, things that not in of their own right. We're not building silos, we're building bridges. So if you think about EHS, for us, what we're looking at is incorporating more of sustainability type of questions and things into our supplier audits. EHS in and of themselves don't have that capability, but now through us in the quality world and with ETQ, we're able to say, look, we've already got a standard supplier quality or supplier audit system. It'd be very simple to add your pieces to it. We're doing the same thing with engineering now, and this year we have a big push to start pushing into the interface between quality and engineering, which being the MES systems that we have in our plants. So if you look at a manufacturing execution system within the plant, what does it do? It's identifying nonconformances. But at that system is not designed to adjudicate those. It's not meant to go in and action those. It's just meant to identify them. So what we've done is we're able to now expand the influence to say, look, you're going to tell us where the problem is, but our system's going to take over and then execute what's going to happen beyond that. So when we started this, we started very small. We started with direct financial impact to the company. And now, as we've gone through these last 3 years, almost 4 years now, we're expanding. We've come to the position where our leadership understands, yes, you have a proven track record. Yeah, are they all home runs? No, there's a whole lot of base hits. But because the base hits and the home runs far exceed any of the failures we may have had, when we go now to our leadership, we have a very defined process that we take. From day one of a process recognition, we talk about finance. There's an entire slide, and if any of you were at the conference this year and you participated in our ROI discussion, there was a slide that I showed that it was the exact slide of how we do it. We lay out line by line the financial impact to the company. Now we are very conservative in our numbers. We don't go crazy promising the world, but what we do is we take a real approach that, based on the time it's going to take to implement, the impact remaining in that year, we always come back with a number that says, okay, the first year, second year, third year returns. And then we're able to show that from a financial. So when we go into a gate review, we don't speak of this would be nice, or that would be, this would be a nice thing, or this is a continuous improvement. We speak in terms of, by doing X, Y will happen from a financial perspective. And that could be things such as cycle time compression. That could be things such as true cost savings or cost avoidance. Could be warranty reduction. There's a number of different things that we talk to. The key to this understanding, however, is for everybody on the call and everybody to really start to think about not only in your background, but how you speak today in terms of your role. Because yes, we all sit in quality roles. Some of you on here are IT. And if you're in IT, you probably have a little more understanding of the finance side, because I know our IT, they have to financially justify everything they do also. But if you can learn to speak in this language, this finance language, if you will, what you'll find is it's going to cut across not only the work that has to be done, or the different silos that are out there in the support functions. It'll cut across things like politics. It will cut across things like your objectivity. It will cut across things such as risk, because what you're looking at is it's a quantifiable fix that you're putting into place that in one way or another, you'll be able to see in real time. That's the key to this. If I were to go to my leadership right now and say, we'd like to do this or we'd like to do that, now with the track record we have, okay, they'd probably give me the money. But if we were starting out and I went and said, I'd like to do this, and I think it's gonna, maybe impact some employee training, or it'll give us a better understanding of our document control, my leadership's going to say, well, that's nice, Adam, but right now we have other things that are more important. If you go to them with the financial, this process impacts our bottom line by this much. So by fixing this process, we should realize X amount of improvement. That's a completely different story that you're telling. And that's the key to this. And this is a key to our timeline of why we've been so successful. So in the 2017, from say October 2017 to November of 2019, we were able to launch 51 sites around the world, 7 languages, with a half a dozen modules. And what we did that by a consistent methodology around how we design processes. We got rid of the wild, wild west that I like to call it. There were no more everybody does it their own way. We brought in everybody from around the world. We brought in representatives from the businesses, and we aligned on standardized processes. From there, though, once we did that and we started the full push towards our deployment, we eliminated the discussion around, well, we're special, we do things differently. Because in the beginning, we spent months, and this does take time, but we spent months aligning to the processes, making sure that if someone had a nuanced piece of the process, that we at least addressed it. Now, and there were some cases where we said, that's silly. I'm not sure why you would do that. And we killed it out of the process. In other cases, we said, wow, this is a best practice. Now everybody's going to do this. So it's those different type of approaches to process design, to your deployments, that was allowed us to accelerate this journey, if you will. We did this all with a very minimal amount of people. So my team at the time who took this on, it was myself, and I had 3 people, and that was it. I have 1 program manager, I had 1 full-time designer, and we had an analytics person who was working on the analytics as it trailing behind as we were building processes. They were coming along behind him with the analytics piece. So it can be done. All right, we did it in record time. We actually came in months ahead of schedule. We were supposed to be done by the end of 2020. We were done by November 2019. But I did that because of the team that I had that were able to visualize what we need to do. At the same time, I was able to speak to leadership on their terms in a financial way. So as we started gaining our momentum, when I'd go back and say, oh, I need another X amount of dollars for something, then it became absolutely, take it, you got it. Now, this year, if we jump forward to where we are currently, like I said, I just, in the recent weeks, in the last month or two, I've had leadership reach out saying, hey, we've got more money. If we give you more money, what else can you realize for us? That's where you want to be, because it's at that point that you're no longer playing defense, you are playing offense. All right.
Great. So that's really that's very insightful, Adam. I think that's fantastic. Where now they're coming to you and saying, we're going to give you money, as opposed to you going and asking for money.
Yes. Yeah. And for us too, keep in mind that traditionally I do not have a quality background, and I've said this before. My background is operations. As I went through, when I started my degree as an industrial engineer, I've been in operations my entire career. It's only these last 5 years or so that I've actually been in quality, but I've brought an operations approach to quality, and I've taken it away from the, look guys, here's my piece of paper that shows me that we've scrapped, $25,000. And I've taken it to, okay, understand that this is a $25,000 hit against your bottom line. You want to talk about free cash flow. If you want to talk about, name your metric. I've learned to swing any numbers that we come up with, any metrics that we show. I swing those into financial metrics that hit what our bottom line. So we talk about direct to bottom line impact. So that way we can get around, I've sat in meetings where some leaders they have pet projects. They want their project to succeed. We've even had times, and this year was a perfect example, where our projects have become so dependable that they're bumping other projects off the list when it comes to money. They're bumping other, I would say, higher priority lists, things off the list because those teams have yet to learn how to speak in the language of finance. So they come in talking about the nice feel, the feely goods and things like that. So we've had this year where we were not, one of my projects was not in the top at the beginning until we went through the gate process. And once we sat with leadership and we went through our gate and we showed them the financial impact, guess what? It was bumped to number one. Of the top 5 projects right now, I own 3 of them. So it does work. And it's not because we did home runs every time. We've done a lot of base hits, but those base hits add up, especially when you're talking about direct financial impact to the company.
Sure. So as we get into our discussion here, one of the questions that came in is, so how do we learn to speak the language of business?
So
how did you learn to speak the language of business?
It started in operations. Now it helps if you do, and this is going to sound silly. I went back and got an MBA. So I went back and took some classes on how to speak in the terms of financial management, if you will. But you don't need to go that route. If you can understand how your company tracks their financial well-being, financial health is what a lot of companies will call it. If you can understand that, and this would means finding your finance, finding your controller, your plant, if you're in a corporate role, go find finance and sit and talk and say, look, I need to sit down and discuss with you how we track the financial health of our company. By understanding that, that is the first step of how you then can script your metrics in your poor quality into that language. So you don't need to understand, if you don't understand, your things like, even if you don't understand ROI, to be honest with you, if you can understand how your company tracks poor quality, whether that be some of the extremes I've seen, and which made me shake my head quite a bit, was the one around sales revenue and sales numbers. They actually track the financial well-being of their company with a sales. You have to learn to then move that data in a way that impacts that sales number. Okay. But really it's sitting down with finance as your first step and saying, okay, please explain to me how our metrics are calculated. What is reported up to the leadership of the company? That's the first step. Because then you can take all of your numbers, you can take all, whether it be, your rework or repair, you can take your non-conforming materials, you can take your warranty. All of them can be then turned into an influencer of those bottom line metrics. And that's the key, is being able to turn those into an influencer. Show your leadership how your work is going to influence that bottom line.
Sounds like it's really understanding how your company measures projects and how your company wants to figure out where they want to invest, so what their normal process is.
Correct. And then once you get to that point, what you'll find is, whether your leadership realizes it or not, they will start to prioritize quality, even though they may not know it is quality and a quality initiative, because they're looking at prioritizing what's our biggest return on our investment, and this is how what'll happen, and it's what's happened in our company.
Nice. So so just so everybody on the audience understands, you did submit a lot of questions ahead of time, and we did go through and pick out a number of questions, and a lot of them were very similar. And so we have a few questions here that we're gonna start with, and please feel free to submit other questions. If you remember, use the Q&A box on the GoToWebinar screen there to submit other questions. But one of the things that you've been successful moving these projects forward at Train, and when we think about the language of quality for a minute, we hear a lot about Lean, Six Sigma, ISO 9001, total quality management, etc. What would you say is the most important aspect of going for quality investment?
That direct impact on the bottom line. Believe it or not.
Forget all those other things then, or
you use those other things. I mean, they are, every one of those tools has a specific place. But if you're looking for justification, if you're really looking for how to change the narrative of your company, those won't do it, not in and of themselves. But if you do learn that speaking in the influence of the direct bottom line, that is where you will find your biggest impact. Because you can do things, and some of you may have seen or done in the past, you could do hundreds of projects that you think are having a great impact on the company, and then just to find out that you had absolutely no impact on a bottom line metric. Think of something as simple as free cash flow. The problem with those types of projects is that means when they were started, we didn't understand how that particular process impacted the company. So I think if you look at it from the single most important is really, it goes back to understanding how it impacts the financials of the company, because it's a game changer once you can get to that point.
Okay, and we've already answered a few other questions that have come in, and we talked about how you fared. Obviously, you certainly have been very successful in getting your investments. Is that correct? And
it is.
Pushback? Let me ask you this: do you get pushback from your management still?
Not anymore.
Okay.
Usually it's the one I got was, well, can't we get more? So I'll give you an example. So this year we have a project where we're working on return material authorization, RMA. So as we started to get better and better at non-conforming material, we started getting better at our incoming supplier quality. One of the things that came out pretty quickly was poor supplier quality. How do we get the money back? How do I go back to my supplier, or how do I know how much I'm getting back as opposed to how much I'm supposed to get back? So what we did was, at the end of last year, we started looking at the ETQ data and said, wow, wait a minute. There's a considerable amount of money here that we say we're getting back from the suppliers. But when I go back to finance and I say, okay, finance, how much did we really get back? I get we don't really know. So we immediately turned around and said, okay, wait a minute. Now we're talking about revenue again. We're talking about this is lost revenue if we say we're going to get X amount of dollars and we don't. So this year we're working on a project to build a Oracle interfacing RMA process. So taking the RMA module, taking the RMA process, modifying it to fit our system, but then interfacing it with Oracle. So now I no longer have to ask anybody, did we get our money back? Because the system is going to be looking into Oracle once the debit memo and that process is completed, and says, when the money hits our financial books, then you can close that record. So now we can not only look at, if you think about it from a financial perspective, we're not only looking at how much did we get back, we're closing the gap on, let's say, requested versus received, okay, accounts receivable. So now I go back to finance and I say, hey guys, I can impact your accounts receivable, and they go, ooh, really? Or I can impact your accounts payable. Those are the type of things, it seems kind of silly, but it was with the onset of non-conforming material that we're finally able to see just how much money is involved with poor supplier quality, where they send something to us and it's broken upon delivery. So it's another way that we're saying, in this year they came back and said, well, what if we gave you more money? Can you get us more back? And I had to say, well, no, because if you want to give me the people, I can implement it faster. And if I implement it faster, you can realize more money, because instead of us launching in August or September, maybe I can launch in July. So that becomes the conversation. It's no longer, are you sure you're going to get it? It's how much more can you get? Mm-hmm. And that's where that's where we are today. Now, in the beginning, it was, are you sure this is the correct ROI? Are you sure this is the correct, the amount of, how many days outstanding, or, where you're going to have? Are you sure this is the cycle time? Those were the questions. But it was after those first, when we said we're going after the big financial hitters, and we started immediately seeing the financial impact to the company, that the narrative changed almost immediately.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So as you've been building your narrative and working through the organization, one of the questions was, how do we get consensus to even do anything, to implement a system, to do the project? How do I overcome the politics? What is, in your opinion, in your experience, how have you done this?
So there's two things. This question kind of has two sides. So if we start with the consensus piece, the one piece of this I think that's important is, as you start to talk about commonality, as you start to talk about consistent processes, you have to be open and willing to, let's say, release all of your preconceived notions about the processes, and you really have to focus on what is the best overall process for the company. Okay, we had a lot of this, 51 sites. We had a lot of input on a lot of our processes when it talks about how we want to do it. China wanted to do it one way, India wanted to do it another, US wanted to do it a third way, Europe had their own way of doing it. We had to take those into account to say, okay, at the end of the day, here's where we want to be. Okay, now how we get there we can agree upon. The other thing we did is we actually took all, remember how I said we had hundreds of different processes. Mm-hmm. Everybody had their own way of doing NCM. Everybody had their own way of doing deviation. What we actually did is we took those, we narrowed them down to the top 5 or 6, and then what we did is we put them all up on a board side by side. And we said, okay, here's everything you do that's common. And about 60% of those processes, believe it or not, they were doing the same thing. Now it could be out of sequence, it could be, maybe a slight difference, but they were doing about the same thing. So we said, okay, we've just locked in 60%. Now let's go argue about the other 40. That's the consensus piece, getting that consensus. Now, the politics. We were able to overcome the politics through our gate process. So our gate, we have a 5-gate process for new big projects. It starts out with a gate 0 where it's really just, hey, this is our concept, okay? But even our gate 0 has a financial slide, has a financial impact. So what we found is that as we go through our gate processes and we talk to finance, we don't talk about the process itself. We don't talk about the touchy-feelies. We talk about how this process impacts us financially today and how whatever change we're willing to make is going to impact that. What we found is that cuts across politics, because we've had, if you have a leader on the call who, let's say, has a pet project, or they have a pet team, or they have their own, they want to do something of their own. When you break it down to that financial impact, the other leaders, all of a sudden, instead of just nodding their head and going along with the first leader, they're going to stop and say, well, wait a minute, hold on. This impact will benefit us all. This impact supersedes your thoughts and feelings, because your thoughts and feelings don't have a financial backing that this one does. So what we found is, by using our gate process, we've been able to cut across the political world, and those who were the doubters, or the I would call them the submariners, the ones that come in and torpedo you at every turn, we've actually been able to, I would say, we haven't eliminated their voice, but we have marginalized them to the point where their attacks no longer impact us. And that's the key that I think we've done with a gate process, because we have removed all that from it. We focus on the financial impact, the process itself, the financial impact, the timing, and we focus on those things that are tangible, and it really has been a benefit.
All right, nice. So we're getting close to the end of the hour here. I want to make sure that everybody knows where they can get additional information. Let me just go to the next slide here. You certainly can come to etq.com/resources, but we will take a couple of more questions here. And let me just bring up, I know we got a couple of questions that have come in. Let's see, there's a whole lot of questions that have come in. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to have time to get to all of them, but so let's see, let me go back up. So one of the questions This person is a consultant. Julie wants to work with clients to understand the benefits of our quality regulatory compliance service. How best can she help them to identify the key value drivers and quantify bottom line impact? I think this really probably applies to everybody. How do you understand what the key benefits are, and then
Right.
how do you work to quantifying that?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to understanding how that company manages their metrics. You need to understand the company metrics, because there's times where you may go into a business, or some of you may be in a business, where there is not one quality metric on the CEO's radar. It happens sometimes, and you need to understand that. So especially from a consulting perspective, if you can understand how they justify their performance, good and bad, that's your key to understanding how quality processes, how quality investment is going to impact them. I think, and that's going to be the key.
Okay, great. Louise has a question here. How to involve people to understand the issue of poor quality? The majority of employees are outside finance. They probably don't know what's really happening. So how do you spread the word?
We've done it. We do it by really, I want to say empowering is the wrong word. We do it by inviting all the different, when we start looking at our metrics, okay, and we start to see a trend in, let's say, poor quality based on design. Okay, we have print issues up one side and down the other. So what we do is we're now able to take that information and go directly back to those, let's call them support functions, and then explain to them how they are influencing downriver, if you will. And I'll give you a perfect quick, kind of an anecdotal example. A designer comes in and he designs a new part. Doesn't really do his homework. He takes an old design that's been around for 20, 30 years, makes a change or two, copies it, puts his name on it, and sends it downrange. It gets to procurement. They send it to a supplier. They send it to the same supplier that's making the other part. So they should be able to do this with no problem. That supplier comes back and says, yeah, not only can I not do this one, I've not been making it to the other print for the last 20 years because that print's wrong too. So the idea is you have to engage those different support functions in a way that shows it's not just, hey, you caused us X amount of dollars in problem. It's, listen to me, your process is causing ripples in our processes at points A, B, C, and D. If you would look at your process output, how it addresses our process's input, then you have a way to bring them into the fold. I heard one person years ago when I was still in operations say, well, quality is the sheriff. They're the ones that tell us when we do something wrong. I would kind of change that and say quality is the marshal. The marshal is the one that's saying, look, your actions are impacting others. You need to address your actions, right? Operations are kind of the sheriff. If they do something wrong, they got to police themselves. Quality has to understand the interactions between the different functions. You are a support function, just as engineering is, just as procurement is. You're a vital function. If you can understand how the other functions impact you, then there's a conversation to be had on how you go back and push them in a way that's going to help you in the long run. That's what we've had to do. Yes.
Okay.
I spend a lot of time with other functions and
other
leaders talking about
you get to know your peers across the organization very well, I would assume.
You do. You have to.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And the last question I'll be able to take, because we're really running out of time here, is from Viviana. One of the main cost justifications we always need to provide during budget review time is the cost of licenses for electronic QMS systems. Do you have any ideas on how to write the justification of expending so much money in user licenses?
That one's a little.
You've done once or twice, right?
We've baked that one into our cost. So if you look at from the project justification, when we do an individual project, in our first projects, our first 4 modules that we built, we actually baked that cost into them. So from day one, we said, okay, look, this is going to be the cost of licenses. This is going to be your annual cost of licenses that will cover these 4 modules. So what we do is we bake that into the ROI. So we take that number, and then like if let's say I had a project this year and I had to add licenses to our what we already have, I would bake those licenses into that justification. So that way you only do it the first time. Year over year, if you've got a leader that's asking you to justify the cost of licenses year over year, that would for me would be a key process that I would want to take away from them and say, look, we talk about this when we talk about the process itself, and we talk about the original gate for that project. I don't, it doesn't do you any good year over year because you're realizing the saving. It sounds like they're realizing the savings from the project, but they're not taking into an account that upfront cost because for whoever that leader is, they're not putting 2 and 2 together that explains it's because of the system that you're getting the benefit on the back end.
Right.
And that's where that comes down to.
That makes a lot of sense. So Adam, I want to thank you so much. There's a bunch of other questions that we're just unfortunately not going to be able to get to. Adam has graciously agreed to help respond to some of these. So if there's some specific questions that we didn't get to, we'll work with Adam to get some responses. But I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank everybody who stayed with us in this webinar, and to say thank you to everybody again, and take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Done.